In Chapter 3, we're going to start getting some input, and that input will have to be assigned to variables. Variables have a data type. So the data types so far that we are working with are string, int, double, and decimal. And some of the difficulties that can happen in these first few programs until you get used to the need to convert data types is with input being a different data type than the variable that you want to store it in. The data type determines what type of operations that can be done. Now in C#, if you have an int being divided by an int, the result is an int. This will be causing some problems perhaps when we want to calculate the batting average, because the number of hits is an integer and the number of times that bat is an integer. Are you getting output that shows a 0 or a 1? Then the problem is integer division. We'll talk about how to fix that in a little bit. Now, if your data type is do well, you can concatenate, but obviously you can't subtract or you can't multiply. So as we're getting input, we've got to make sure that the data types on both sides of the assignment operator are compatible. When we get input, normally the input data type will be a string. So if we do a console.readline, that's a string. If we do a text box, the text property, here I have age textbox.text, that's a string. So if I have a variable called age and the age is an int, however, I'm putting the data in a text box and that's a string, how do I assign the input to that string? And the answer is you must convert the string to an integer first. So let's take a look at the types of conversions that we have in this chapter. So to convert string input to a number, let's reference page 142 of the text. To convert a string to any of the numeric data types, you can use the parse methods. Now there are other methods. We will be learning other methods as we go through the book. So if you do int.parse, you will take a string argument and convert it to an int. Double.parse takes a string argument and converts it to double. Decimal.parse takes a string argument and converts it to decimal. Okay, so when you call one of the parse methods, you pass a piece of data, that's an argument, I was mentioning that, and that method returns a piece of data back to you of the data type you have. Here is from the book, we're calling int.parse some string. If that string can be converted, then it will convert that value to an integer. Let's look at this in a little more detail. So we have an integer called hours worked. We have a text box, and here's an image of a text box. Someone has input 40. However, that value is the string 40. Notice the quotes. That is a string 40, not the number 40. That resides in the text property of this text box called hours worked text box. However, I want to assign that 40 to this integer variable, hours worked. In order to do that, this is a string. This string, which is actually the name of the text box, .text, is the argument inside the parentheses of the int.parse method. So since 40 can be converted, the string 40 can be converted to the number 40. It's done, and then that is assigned to the variable hours worked. Here are similar examples with a double variable. We'll use double.parse. With a decimal variable, we'll use decimal.parse. Of course, all of this assumes that the data entered into the text box is valid. Since you have no control over the user, there is a chance that they might not enter a double value. They might enter yes, okay, which is a string. Can you convert YES? No. And so this can cause issues. Let's see what we can do about that. Okay, so we have our same code from the previous slide, but look, I entered mom. I entered hours worked, and I entered mom. As I said, you have no control over the user. So let's say they enter mom, they start processing the data. You start trying to process that data into an integer. It can't be done. Have you seen this? It actually causes what's called a runtime error. Your user is going to see this. Format exception was unhandled. It stops execution of the program. It is not a graceful way to handle the error. We never ever want to see this or produce a program in which a user can enter faulty data and get something like this. And that's the purpose of the try-catch that you're going to be doing in program 7. Okay, what about output? So output to a text box or output using console.writeLine is normally a string. So when you want to output, I have here a decimal number, and it's 1550, and that M just makes it a decimal, make sure it agrees with the data type. So gross pay is a decimal. The .toString method, notice the parentheses after it with no arguments. So gross pay .toString will convert it to decimal, to string, and allow me to store that value in the text box. You can, if you'd like, you can put data, you can put an argument in here, and that argument will allow you to format your output. In this example, we have a decimal amount, and it looks like it's got 5 decimal places. Using a C with quotes around it, notice the quotes, and look, it can be a capital C or lowercase c, but that's going to format the output in currency format. And you see it in the message box. Here's an example. It shows a $sign. That's what currency does. There is a comma separator for the thousand place and 2 decimal places. So it looks like it rounded, okay, to do 2 decimal places. So here are some of the values you can use in your format string. Just numeric output. You're not worried about $signs, for example, but you do want to indicate how many decimal places. There's a few scientific and exponential notation formats. There's the currency, and there's also a format if you want to show a percent sign. If you're using, for example, the numeric format string, you can use a 3 to force the output of the number of decimals to be 3 or a 2. Okay. Well, we're not always converting from a numeric to a string. Sometimes you need to convert from one type of numeric data type to another type of numeric data type. You'll find this on page 134. And this is known as casting. So to cast, you're going to put in parentheses in front of the variable that you're trying to cast the data type you want to cast it to. So here we have whole number, which is an integer, and we have money number, which is a decimal, and money number for some reason needs to be assigned to the integer variable. Now the data type must agree, integer to integer. See the cast here? That will cast that and allow it us to say, hey, it's the same data type on both sides of the assignment operator, so that can happen. Again, here is a double and a decimal, and now we're casting money number to double. And then finally, we have a decimal and a double, and we can use the decimal and we can cast it to decimal. So whatever we have in the left-hand side, cast the right-hand side to that value, and then we won't have any problems with those statements. Once we start having expressions, so here we have an expression, it's a mathematical expression on the right-hand side of the assignment operator. The previous slide was simpler, we just had one variable. So what if we have 2 different data types? So here we have a double, and here we have a decimal, okay, and total is decimal. Notice it causes an error. It needs to match data type. So why don't we do this? Since the output's going to be decimal, and weight is double, let's cast weight to decimal. So now this is a decimal, this is a decimal. We multiply it together, the result is a decimal, and it's assigned to a decimal, so that works. Just be aware of your data types when you're working with expressions. Try to make a match. On page 140, we reference integer division. And I want to do this because your assignment is asking you to do some integer division. And you might get some funny results. So in this example, we have an integer length. It's assigned the value 75. But we have a double half. So now you think, well, length divided by 2, sure, that's 37 and a half will be 37. It's not. It's not 37 and a half. It actually does an integer division. So it does 75 divided by 2 and truncates the 0.5, half becomes 37. So how to handle that? Let's make both of these double. Now you can't stop the fact that you declared it as an int here, but you can cast it. So we're casting length to double. I went ahead and took that 2 and made it 2.0, which makes that a double. So we've got a double divided by a double, and half will be 37.5. Now remember earlier when I showed you that format unhandled exception because someone entered mom and we were trying to convert that to an integer. So this is called a runtime error, and runtime errors stop the execution of the program, which is bad. It's very bad. So I want you to use figure 324 on page 159 as a model. The try catch clause stops that from happening. In the catch part, you will put a little error message. So if there is bad input, you can put an error message like bad input. Here's the sample program I gave you for chapter 6, and I just wanted to point out that we're doing some double dot parse, okay? And of course we're doing a console application, but this returns a string of whatever was input, and we're parsing it to double, which is what ours was declared. How about the output? Let's take the output. Gross pay, well, gross pay is a double, but notice the to string. And if I wanted to, I could have put that C for currency format right there. To wrap it all up, the problems with programs 6 and 7 for you as a new student in programming will be data type agreement. So just think about making the data types on both sides of the assignment statement agree, and I think you will find that you'll have an easier time coding your program. Please contact me if you have any questions, and best of luck.